Greyhawk Grognard here. If you like the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. Hit the bell so you get notified. You know, all that other good stuff that all the channels say. And feel free to visit my blog and my Patreon. Links are down below. Now, enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Greyhawk Grognard here, and today I wanted to talk about how to start a Greyhawk campaign. And this is going to be aimed at beginning dungeon masters who are, maybe kind of sort of familiar with the setting. They've heard of it, they know some of the very basics, but they're not really sure of all the different options and all the different resources that are out there. So I thought I would go through some of the just the high-level basic stuff. And the first thing you really need to decide when you want to start a campaign like this, or any campaign for that matter, is what game system you want to run it in. So, for example, Greyhawk was originally published for first edition. And, that's where a lot of the old classic modules, the Giants, the Drow, the things like that were in first edition. So there's a lot of material that exists out there. In second edition, it was also really popular. There's, obviously more published modules and stuff. There's not a lot of second edition specific mechanics that are specific to Greyhawk. So you're not going to find like official Greyhawk kits and things like that. I remember back in the old AOL Greyhawk days that I had done like kits for every class for every nation. I wish I still had that stuff. But none of that really is officially or as far as I know unofficially available. There's a lot of material on. There's a big file out there about the gods. I think that stems from the second edition era. For third edition, you're going to, if you're looking for mechanical stuff, you're going to rely a lot on Dragon Magazine, which had a lot of feats and things like that, and the Living Greyhawk Journal, which had in some of the issues, I believe there were some prestige classes and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of stuff out there. You're gonna have to dig for it. Although one thing, just a note, I would ask. I'm gonna mention probably a couple of things in this video that are not in print and yet can be found online as bootlegs. I would ask my listeners not to put links to bootleg sites in my comments. If you do, I will delete them. I'm sure anybody who wants to find them can with simple searches, but I just have a thing about pointing to illegal download sites, so I would ask you not to do that. Fourth edition, who cares? It's fourth edition. Fifth edition, there is again not a lot of official mechanics out there because it's the Forgotten Realms is really the official setting. So there's a little bit of Greyhawk stuff on the periphery. There's some adventures, and they've done some reprints and stuff like that. But if you're looking for 5th edition mechanics, you can go to my blog. On the at the top, you'll find a free download section, and there you'll find a whole bunch of character class options and race options and spells and all that stuff done up for 5th edition if you're wanting. Obviously none of it's official, but it's a free download, so you're welcome to use it in your game. There's probably some other 5th edition mechanical stuff floating out around there, and again a quick search will probably dig it up. But in terms of that, one of the advantages of first edition is that it will not only work with second edition pretty much seamlessly, but also with basic D&D and most of the retro clones that are out there, like Swords and Wizardry, Adventures Dark and Deep, Labyrinth Lord, Castles and Crusades. Most of that stuff you can just take a first edition module and just use it. So that's what I got on the the version of the game. Although again, I've seen people do Greyhawk in like Savage Worlds. I've seen people use basic role playing for it. That nothing says you have to use D&D when you're in Greyhawk. I think there are some games like a chivalry and sorcery game set in Greyhawk would be really fun. There's all kinds of different ways that you could adapt Greyhawk to other game systems. So don't feel compelled that you're trapped into D&D. But if you choose D&D, that's my advice. Now, in terms of the next decision you as an aspiring Greyhawk DM have to make, it's when in the settings timeline you want to run your game. When the World of Greyhawk was originally published, it was set in 576 of the Common Year. That is the era of the folio, the gold box, most of the classic modules like Temple of Elemental Evil, the Giants, the Drow, Lost Caverns of Sajkanth, all those great classic adventures were published during that 576 to 578 era of the settings. So, that is certainly a well-documented and an easily accessible era. I personally prefer it for a couple of reasons. First, I think it lends itself better to regular D&D type adventuring because everything is kind of in a state of balance, as it were. There's evil out there, but it isn't completely dominating everything. There's good out there, but it is hard pressed. So it's kind of in a state of flux. Where things could go either way, and that is exactly the kind of environment where adventurers flourish. So that would be my personal recommendation to start in 576. However, there is also, it's up on the shelf. There's also the From the Ashes era, which is 585 of the Common Year. This takes place after the Greyhawk Wars, which sees a whole bunch of evil kingdoms basically conquering huge swaths of territory. A lot of good nations are, almost conquered. There are evil nations that are conquered by other evil nations. Ayuz, the evil demigod in the north, has a huge empire now. The Scarlet Brotherhood has taken over a bunch of places. And it's very much, you get a feel, there are demons walking the earth. You very much get a feeling of impending doom. This is a setting where good is on its knees fighting for its very survival. And if that's the kind of game you want, it's very doomy, very gloomy, very grimmy, very darky. So if that's what the kind of game you want to play, 585 using the From the Ashes box set is probably the way you want to go. Now the other setting that was published is in 591, and I had it right here, and now I don't see it. What did I do with it? I don't know what I did. So there are a couple of publications. There's the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer is set in 591. There's also a book called The Adventure Begins, which is also set in 591. I tend to of the two, I tend to prefer The Adventure Begins because it's a little more accessible, especially for a beginner DM. It'll still give you the broad strokes of what's going on, what's happened in recent history. It gives you all that kind of stuff. But I personally feel that the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer kind of overwhelms you with a lot of data. There's just a ton of information in here. And I don't particularly find it easy to digest, and especially if you're a newbie to the setting, you might get overwhelmed with the fire hose that you get in this book. There's also the question of whether or not Living Greyhawk is actually canon to the rest of the Greyhawk setting, as opposed to just being its own thing, because so much in Living Greyhawk was done outside of the direct control of TSR at the time. So, you might find things that don't really jive a lot. And my personal, and I know, God, I know Living Greyhawk has a lot of people who love it. I'm not trying to piss you off, I promise. I personally don't like it. There were some quality issues because, it wasn't all under the TSR official banner. And, things just kind of go off in all kinds of different directions and things. But, if you're one of the fans of it, then by all means, feel free to keep using it. But of the two, I would probably urge a beginner to seek out a copy of The Adventure Begins for an overview, a broad look at what the setting is like in 591. Okay, so now that we have decided on our game system and we've decided on our era, now we have to figure out what are some great resources for a beginner DM. And I would recommend a better organization of my workspace before I make a video. I would recommend the Gold Box, regardless of game system and regardless of era. It's first edition, and yes, it is set in 576, but it gives such a wonderful overview of the setting. The mechanics don't really intrude a lot. You'll find a few things here in the glossography, especially when you're dealing with the deities, but it's not really going to come up all that much. It's not like there's all kinds of first edition specific stuff in there that's going to ruin it, if you're using third or fifth, or second. And it has that nice broad overview. A lot of the information is still relevant, regardless of what era you're playing in. So and plus you get those wonderful Darlene maps, which is just, they're one of the iconic things about the setting. So I would seek this out. I don't know if it's available on drive-thru. If it is, I'll put a link down below. But I would consider this a foundational piece of information, regardless of era or the setting of the version of D&D that you're using. Now, next up, my suggestion is going to be that a beginner DM set his game in the center of the map. It is very possible to run a campaign in the Great Kingdom or in Kaoland or in the Thilronian Peninsula or in Ul or whatever. But for a beginner, I'm going to suggest that you use the center of the map, if only because it has a lot of different terrain all crammed in one place, and I'm very sure that's not a mistake. Or an accident. I'm very sure that there's a desert next to a swamp, next to a forest, next to mountains, because that was the original campaign. And because there's a lot of published material that will cover that, including the city of Greyhawk. And again, regardless of your era or your rule system, this is written for 2nd edition, and it is set in 585, after the Greyhawk Wars. But despite that, it's very, very useful, no matter what era you're playing in and no matter what version of the game you're playing in. Again, 1st and 2nd edition rules are very forgiving in terms of mechanics. They'll give a level for an NPC and maybe some hit points or whatever, but they won't give huge stat blocks, which makes conversion a little easy. Plus, you're dealing here with a lot of NPCs and personalities and things like that. So it's a very useful box, no matter what you're using. The one caveat I would put in there, however, is that the map. The map is kind of wanting, the original map, I should say. There is a much better, much more filled-in map. The one that comes in the box is very sparse, oddly sparse in terms of how dense the buildings are. There's like I say, there's another map that takes this original and kind of fills in a lot more buildings, makes it feel a lot more Lonkmari, rather than probably a real medieval town would be. And also, if you don't like that, there is another variant map on my blog, which is based on the map that Gary put in the beginning of one of his Gord the Rogue novels. So you have some options in there, but the books themselves are just top notch. Absolutely recommend this no matter when you're playing. And then you're going to want a tent pole, and the tent pole dungeon is obviously for the World of Greyhawk. It's going to be Castle Greyhawk, and you have a couple of options here. I'm just going to throw out the one pie in the sky one. If you can get a copy of Castle Zagig, you might be able to see it on the shelf back there. Grab it. It's Gary's attempt to publish castle, his castle in a kind of idealized form. I should probably do a whole video on it at some point. It's only the castle, the ruins, and then the first level of the dungeon. But if you can find it, get it, because it's brilliant. It's as you might expect. And if not, then I would suggest getting Greyhawk Ruins. This is the one to get, not the one called Castle Greyhawk, which was a joke/insult module published right after Gary left TSR. So I would don't. But this one, it's a solid mega dungeon. It's huge. It's got all kinds of interesting politics going on in the things. There's factions and things are going on. It's got lots of nice traps and tricks, and there's interesting stuff happening. I think it would have been much better received if it didn't have the word Greyhawk on it. But even then, this is the standard currently for the ruins of Castle Greyhawk. This is also, they did an expansion, I guess, expedition to Greyhawk Ruins, and it obviously based itself on this. So if you need it, you're going to want a tentpole dungeon in addition to all your little dungeons and adventures that you run, just to have the players have a place to go, at need and at their want. This is the thing to get. Now that still leaves you with options for a beginner adventure setting. And again, I'm going to suggest staying in the middle of the map. And if you do that, then you're going to go with the Village of Hamlet or its expansion, the Temple of Elemental Evil. And it's obviously my favorite Greyhawk adventure. I devote probably too much time to it on my blog. But it's really good. And I should also point out that I have promised when we hit 750 subscribers, I will be doing my review of Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil, which will promise to be quite spirited, because I'm not a fan of the sequel module. But anyway, so please, if you haven't already, subscribe and tell your friends to subscribe, just to force my hand and make me do that review, because that's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, but I digress. There are some other options that you have in terms of starting dungeons. I really like In Search of the Unknown as a starting dungeon. This is also really good if you're new to D&D First Edition or Basic in general. It's designed as a learner dungeon. So it's got lots of descriptions for all the rooms and everything, but the DM fills in which monsters and which treasures go in which room. And there's lots of advice and things like that. In later iterations of the module, it was more generic. But in this original version that I have, if you can read it, it says, in the mythical world of Greyhawk, you can put this in the Barony of Radek, the Duchy of Ten, or the Theocracy of the Pale. So you've got some options there, and you could put it anywhere there's barbarians. There's also Keep on the Borderlands, which was originally published as a more generic type adventure, but was later retconned into the world of Greyhawk. This and Temple of Elemental Evil have the advantage of having entire communities as well as the dungeon setting. So in here you've got the Village of Hamlet and the Village of Nulb. Here you've got the titular Keep, and then there's a dungeon that's not too far away that or two that you can that your players can go to. B1 is just the dungeon, so you'd have to flesh out like a little village and put it nearby or whatever, which is fine. It's, you know, you're the DM. That's what you're supposed to be doing. But B1 and B2 are kind of on the periphery. They're out on the edge of the setting, rather than right in the middle, like Temple of Elemental Evil. You can also take a look at the L series, Secret of Bone Hill, The Assassin's Knot. There are some others available for free download over on Dragon's Foot that were written by Len Lakofka. This is another setting. This is actually much more fleshed out. It's got villages, it's got dungeons, it's got a lot of NPCs. It's really well done. But again, it's on the edge of the map, so to speak. So it's, you know, worth taking a look at. And there you have it. Those are my recommendations for how to do a starting Greyhawk campaign. I would love to hear your recommendations and your thoughts. You know, I'm sure I've missed a ton of stuff out there. So please, what would you recommend if you had somebody who wanted to start a Greyhawk campaign who's never done Greyhawk before? What would you recommend to them in terms of resources and books and things like that? I would love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, and I will talk